22-year-old Jaden Napolitano went to her ex-boyfriend's house on Serene Run in Lake Worth Beach, Florida, on the night of July the 20th of 2022. The couple had split up approximately 4 months prior, but they'd been seeing each other and hooking up even after the breakup. According to a police report, Napolitano attacked her ex on the night in question. She allegedly began slapping him in the head, then started punching him after he tried to block the strikes. The man, who was left unnamed in subsequent reports, attempted to subdue his violent ex-girlfriend by wrapping her in a beer hug. He managed to pin her to the ground, but when he let her stand up, she reportedly grabbed a piece of wood and threw it at him, hitting his arm. Napolitano then proceeded to hurl several objects at the man's pickup truck, causing the windshield to crack. At some point, the man's new girlfriend arrived at the scene, further inflaming the dispute with Napolitano. The two women argued with one another before the situation escalated to physical violence. Napolitano allegedly lunged at the other woman and struck her in the face. In the incident's aftermath, Napolitano from Delray Beach was arrested and charged with domestic battery, criminal mischief, and aggravated battery. After being booked at the Palm Beach County Jail, the young woman was released on her own recognizance. Number 5. James Hatchem. On July the 28th of 2023, a woman contacted Australian law enforcement to inform them that she found partial human remains in a grassy area near the Hume Highway on the southern outskirts of Goulburn, southwest of Sydney. Authorities subsequently searched the surrounding areas extensively, leading to the discovery of more remains. Through forensic analysis, investigators were able to identify the body parts as belonging to 30-year-old Samar Baker. The latter was a vocational education and training worker from Greater Western Sydney. Back in January of 2019, she was murdered near her Parramatta apartment by her ex-boyfriend, James Hatchem. The 35-year-old from Hertzville Grove was described as Baker's occasional lover. The pair had an on-again, off-again relationship for over 3 years, continuing to share intimate encounters outside the confines of a full-fledged dating relationship. About a month before Baker initially went missing, she ended her involvement with Hatchem altogether. After meeting another man, Hatchem was reportedly incensed by the development. He formulated a fake story about his parents getting into a car accident in order to lure Baker out of her apartment, whereupon he killed her. Following the murder, Hatchem went to a hardware store to purchase a sheet, gloves, cleaning products, and a digging trowel. He subsequently drove to a number of isolated rural areas to dispose of the body. In 2022, Hatchem was found guilty of Baker's murder. Despite her remains not having been found by that point, he was sentenced to a minimum of 18 years behind bars for the crime. Number 4. Kiera Levitt. British woman Kiera Levitt was left alone at the home of a friend with benefits on December the 19th of 2020. Before leaving to buy some more alcohol, the man had ordered a pizza to arrive at the Sunderland home. While he was gone, Levitt became convinced that he was seeing another woman and sent him messages that read, "Watch your house go up in flames and you won't have no home left." 30-year-old Levitt then set fire to the man's shoes on the porch before taking a taxi home. Prior to the emergency services making their way to the scene, the pizza delivery driver had arrived at the address and saw what he believes was the silhouette of a woman inside the smoking apartment. The unnamed man went into the residence and tried to put out the fire, which was initially restricted to the hallway. However, by the time he'd searched the home and found no one inside, the fire had extended considerably. The delivery driver thus ran out and called the emergency services. The blaze would ultimately require 3 fire engines to put out. The home of Levitt's friend was left uninhabitable due to extensive water, smoke, and fire damage. The cost of repairs was reported as being in the 4 figures. A shop below the apartment had also been affected and had to be closed down for a few days. When Levitt was arrested the following morning, she reportedly became belligerent, screaming that no one was going to make a mug of her. The woman admitted arson, being reckless to whether life would be endangered, but avoided jail time. In August of 2021, she was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, suspended for 2 years, with rehabilitation, alcohol treatment, and curfew requirements. Number 3. Cedric Brown. In the early hours of April the 11th of 2022, Florida man Cedric Brown went to the West Palm Beach home belonging to a woman described as his friends with benefits. She'd reportedly been calling his phone repeatedly that night. According to what the unnamed woman told police, she was imploring him to give her money he owed relating to her income tax refund. Fed up with her insistent attempts to reach him, Brown barged into the house and confronted her in her bedroom, where she was sitting with her brother and a friend. Brown tossed the house key she'd given him at her, then demanded that she stop calling him. The woman later told police that Brown reached into his pants, pulled out a green handgun, and cocked the gun back to place a round in the chamber. He then pointed it directly at her and stated, "I'll kill all y'all." Brown eventually put the weapon away, approached the woman and snatched her cell phone. The 31-year-old man took the phone into the kitchen and started smashing it on the ground, trying to break it. Brown's friend with benefits reportedly saw several shards of broken glass on the kitchen floor, which came from the sliding pantry door that shattered when a piece of the phone ricocheted upwards. Brown left out the back door and the woman followed. However, at some point he pulled out the green handgun and struck her in the back of the head with it. The man then got in his car and left the scene. The altercation that unfolded outside the house was captured by a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera. A warrant was issued for Brown's arrest and police units were sent to his last known address. A brief pursuit ensued, but he was eventually apprehended. He was charged with armed burglary of a dwelling, robbery with a firearm, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, 2 counts of aggravated assault with intent to commit a felony, resisting an officer without violence, and tampering with a witness or victim. As per the most recent updates, Brown had been released on bail. Today's topic was requested by Svakami Sozondi. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Theodore Pundi. Las Vegas man Theodore Pundi was in a relationship with Tiffany Swiderski for 12 years, during the course of which they had 3 children. In 2022, the pair split up for a couple of months before getting back together. Meanwhile, Swiderski also grew close with a man by the name of Chad Jensen, although they maintained a friends-only relationship for about 4 years with Pundi in the picture. Eventually, their bond became more intimate in nature. Swiderski would go on to describe their relationship as being akin to friends with benefits. On January the 6th of 2023, 38-year-old Pundi and Swiderski went to a local cafe before returning to the trailer park near Washington Avenue and Lamb Boulevard, where they'd been staying with Swiderski's aunt. As they were entering the code to unlock the gates at the front of the complex, Jensen reportedly pulled up next to them. The man exited his vehicle, hurling obscenities at both Swiderski and Pundi, whom he also punched in the mouth. Subsequently, Pundi pulled out a gun and fired 5 shots, hitting his love rival, who then got back in his car and drove into some landscaping. Swiderski and Pundi went to her aunt's trailer, where the latter got into another car and attempted to flee the complex. However, as he pulled up to the front gate, his path was blocked by police cruisers. The man eventually surrendered to law enforcement. While speaking with officers, Pundi indicated that he and Jensen had engaged in multiple verbal spats in the weeks leading up to the shooting. He claimed to have snapped when Jensen confronted them, stating, "Maybe deep down I wanted to shoot this guy." Jensen, who was unarmed at the time, ultimately succumbed to his gunshot wounds. Pundi consequently faced the charge of open murder in connection with the incident. When betraying friends goes wrong is lined up for the die-hard fans who'd still like to watch another one today. Stay tuned after number 1 if you'd like. Number 1. Scott Andrew Hundley. 44-year-old Scott Andrew Hundley from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, faced serious criminal charges for a relationship he formed with a teenage girl. The man was accused of creating a friends with benefits situation with the unnamed minor, who was the daughter of one of Hundley's colleagues. In court, the victim's mother said that he took advantage of her daughter, adding, "Her life is forever impacted." The woman also stated her belief that going to jail wouldn't do anything to change Hundley as a person. At some point during the proceedings, the Franklin County Assistant District Attorney read aloud a letter written to Hundley, by the victim herself. She wrote that she hated him and that he didn't deserve the tears he'd caused her to shed. She also reflected on their initial meeting, when Hundley allegedly told her that she looked like she was in her 20s. Her father corrected the man and told him she was still just a teen. Nevertheless, Hundley refused to back off. The girl continued writing, "I saw you as my best friend and counselor. I feel embarrassed, betrayed." In the end, Hundley was convicted of indecent assault and corruption of minors at a jury trial in May of 2016. He wasn't, however, found guilty of the more severe charge of aggravated indecent assault. The presiding judge sentenced him to up to 23 months in county jail, after which he would be on probation for a period of 5 years. Hundley was also ordered to pay fines and restitution, as well as to register as a Megan's Law offender for 40 years. Number 8. Shyrel Joseph Wesley. California man Shyrel Joseph Wesley was convicted of killing the man he called his brother on November the 1st of 2018, whereupon he was sentenced to 80 years to life in prison. 21 years old at the time of the murder, Wesley allegedly recruited his girlfriend, 18-year-old Shefa Chevis, to help him dispose of the corpse of his lifelong friend, D'Angelo Charon, also 21. Wesley had been out on parole for an armed robbery when he and Chevis drove the victim from San Diego to Vista. It was there that he shot Charon 3 times before returning to San Diego to throw his best friend's cell phone into Mission Bay, a man-made saltwater lake. Wesley and Chevis were found guilty of murdering Charon after he'd allegedly disrespected the former in some way. Before his severe sentence was handed down, Wesley had pleaded with the presiding judge for leniency and even requested to be accepted into a youthful offender program. Chevis, who testified during her boyfriend's trial, confirmed that the two men had been arguing leading up to the killing. The prosecutor accused her of having known about the sinister details of her boyfriend's plan to drive the victim to Vista to kill him, and after being found guilty of manslaughter, she was sentenced to 6 years behind bars. Number 7. Mike Williams. For 17 years, Florida man Mike Williams was thought to have drowned while on a duck hunting excursion with his best friend, Brian Winchester. His wife, then 30-year-old Denise Williams, had initially reported the real estate appraiser's disappearance in December of 2000. It wasn't until 2018 that the man's gunshot-riddled body was finally found in Carr Lake. The discovery took place only a day after Winchester had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for kidnapping his best friend's widow, whom he'd married following Williams's disappearance before divorcing her in 2016. She was subsequently arrested for allegedly plotting her husband's death with Winchester. Over the span of 9 months, the latter had convinced the victim to sign a $1 million life insurance policy several months before he was murdered. Winchester later testified against Denise during her first criminal trial in exchange for immunity in connection to Williams's death. The conniving spouse was found guilty of orchestrating her husband's murder and consequently sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her attorneys appealed the conviction on several occasions, but the guilty verdict was ultimately confirmed during a resentencing hearing in September of 2021. Number 6. Gemma Hater. On August the 8th of 2010, a group of 5 young adults from Rugby, England, tortured and murdered their friend, Gemma Hater, who'd been dealing with undiagnosed mental disabilities since childhood. 27-year-old Hater, who was described as overly trusting and naive by her family, had been talked into stealing and storing illegal substances for her manipulative acquaintances. During the weeks leading up to her death, on the night of August the 7th, the victim was out with the group, the members of which were identified as Daniel Newstead, Chantel Booth, Joe Boyer, Duncan Edwards, and Jessica Linus. Hater reportedly angered the group by making a joke about one of her friends being underage in front of a bar's bouncer. The 5 friends, who ranged from high school to college-aged, decided to beat Hater as a punishment before eventually letting her return home. The following day, the victim was called over to Booth's house, where she was severely abused for several hours. Among the torturous acts committed on Hater were breaking her nose, forcing her to drink urine, and throwing her against a radiator. The group finally told her they'd take her back to her apartment, but instead guided the victim to a railway bank where they placed a bag over her head before stabbing and stomping her to death. When authorities discovered the young woman's body, they were able to track the footprints indented on her head to the assailants. In September of 2011, Newstead, Booth, and Boyer were each sentenced to life behind bars, while Linus and Edwards received prison sentences of 13 and 15 years respectively. Number 5. Quia Mo. 21-year-old Tainai Coates had known her best friend and roommate Quia Mo for most of her life, but nevertheless stabbed her to death on the night of October the 11th of 2021. The pair had shared an apartment in Jefferson, Indiana, where Mo lived along with her children. The victim's sister, Keena Dixon, was present at the home when a contentious argument erupted between the lifelong friends. Dixon later revealed how tensions eventually rose to such a level that Coates grabbed a knife and viciously attacked Mo with it. By the time first responders arrived, Mo was unresponsive and efforts to revive her were unsuccessful. Police officers who took the suspect into custody later testified that Coates didn't seem to be aware of the severity of Mo's condition following the altercation. She was reportedly so distressed by the news of her friend's death that she had to be physically restrained to keep her from hurting herself. Although Coates was initially charged with first-degree murder, she pleaded guilty to reckless homicide as part of a deal with the prosecution in December 2021. She was consequently sentenced to 5 years in prison. Number 4. Heidi Brossard. On December the 12th of 2019, Texas resident Megan Fieramusca kidnapped and murdered her longtime friend Heidi Brossard. Leading up to the fateful incident, Fieramusca had been lying to her friends and family for several months by pretending to be pregnant. She reportedly panicked as the fake birth date she'd given them began to approach. It was in her severely distressed state of mind that Fieramusca plotted to steal 33-year-old Brossard's infant daughter, Margot Carey. The woman was reported missing by her husband after she'd failed to return home with their baby after dropping their 6-year-old son off at school. Investigators began interviewing family and friends, eventually reaching out to Fieramusca and her husband to solicit testimony from them. The authorities learned from the couple's neighbors that they'd recently brought home a newborn baby girl, but Fieramusca told officers she couldn't recall any details surrounding the birth, including the name of the hospital or the doctors involved in the delivery. Suspicious of Fieramusca's replies during questioning, detectives showed her husband a picture of Margot Carey, and he immediately confirmed she was the baby his wife had brought home a week earlier. Police officers retrieved the infant upon searching Fieramusca's home, where they also discovered Brossard's lifeless body hidden in the trunk of their car. It subsequently emerged that the mother of two had been strangled to death. Fieramusca was consequently charged with kidnapping, capital murder, and tampering with a corpse. As of recent updates, the case's trial hadn't yet begun. Number 3. Anthony Richardson. On February the 7th of 2019, Anthony Richardson died after being brutally attacked by the friends he'd been drinking with at a pub in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. 46-year-old Richardson was first assaulted by Nathan Aldous, aged 28, who knocked the victim out before he could see who his attacker was. Then, 45-year-old Thomas Brand, another one of the men drinking at the pub, attempted to render aid to Richardson, who accused him of being involved in the initial attack, leading to an argument. The rowdy friends were asked to leave the bar and police were called to the scene. Upon their arrival, officers found Richardson lying unresponsive on the ground with severe injuries to his head. Brand indicated that the victim had suffered from a fit inside the pub that had caused him to hit his head on the floor. After reviewing CCTV footage, however, detectives discovered that Brand and Richardson had continued to argue even after exiting the pub. The dispute eventually culminated with Brand punching Richardson, who was consequently thrown to the ground, causing his injuries. The incapacitated man was taken to the hospital, but despite intensive efforts to revive him, he ultimately died the following morning. Aldous was incarcerated for 27 weeks for assault, while Brand was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison. At the request of Richardson's family, the video of the fatal altercation was released to the media so that the public would learn the devastating consequences of throwing even one punch. Number 2. Randy Stone. On March the 31st of 2010, Missouri man Randy Stone was found dead inside his Independence residence by his wife of 19 years, Teresa. The 42-year-old man's family subsequently organized a traditional religious church funeral service, as he was reportedly a devout Christian, with the eulogy being delivered by Stone's best friend, 50-year-old minister David Love. Detectives quickly ruled out robbery as a potential motive for Stone's murder after determining that none of his belongings had been stolen. Investigators eventually decided to take a closer look into the victim's friends and family members as potential suspects. This led police to discover incriminating evidence against the victim's 40-year-old wife and his best friend. A conversation that took place via text on March the 16th, about 2 weeks before the killing, revealed that Teresa Stone and Love had not only been lovers, but that they'd made plans to murder both of their spouses in order to be together. Robert Davis, a family friend of the Stones, revealed during the eventual trial that he'd visited the victim's widow after finding out about his death. Above all else, she'd allegedly seemed concerned about when she'd be able to collect her husband's life insurance policy. When Teresa was interrogated by the police, she admitted to giving her lover access to the house by way of the garage, as well as to waiting several minutes before calling 911 upon discovering her husband's lifeless body. The woman was only sentenced to 8 years in prison for conspiring to murder her husband, the father of her 2 children. Love, on the other hand, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in November of 2011 and was consequently sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Number 1. Casey Lorn. On April the 9th of 2018, Casey Lorn was found dead in his car in Vosburg, Mississippi, sporting what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He'd reportedly made a series of posts on his social media accounts detailing his involvement in the murder of his mother by and close friend Avery Gaines. The unprompted online confession described how Lorn had invited Gaines over to his house before receiving a call from his mother asking him to pick her up at a bar. Once he returned to the house with the woman, Lorn used a stolen long rifle to fatally shoot his friend first, before gunning down his mother as well. Although Gaines reportedly died instantly, Lorn recounted how he'd needed to shoot his mother several times before she finally stopped screaming. He fled the scene after stealing his friend's wallet in the aftermath. When local authorities were alerted to Lorn's confession, a manhunt was launched to find the 24-year-old suspect, whose body was ultimately found in his vehicle somewhere along Interstate 59. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be in a committed relationship that lacks physical intimacy, or be friends with benefits but have little emotional connection? Let us know in the comments section below.